The hall was full of voices and lights. Every noble alien family sat in their glowing seats watching the center stage, where a golden platform rose from the floor. This was the day of royal bonding, the event held only once in a generation to unite the royal house of Velaria with another powerful family across the galaxy. The air smelled like burning stars and sweet metal incense, and in the center of it all stood a small girl with silver skin and glowing white hair. Her name was Princess Alira, and she was the last heir of the Valerian bloodline. Her legs shook beneath the heavy dress, and her fingers clenched the edge of her robe. She looked up and saw rows of alien princes and noble sons watching her with blank faces, some covered their mouths to hide their laughter. Some looked away, pretending to admire the walls. Her voice trembled as she gave the traditional welcome speech, thanking them for coming and offering her hand in union. No one stepped forward. The hall was silent. A long, cruel silence. Then, one by one, each candidate gave a reason: too small, too weak, too different, not worthy. Her eyes stung, but she held her smile. The Valerian king, her father, stood beside her, tall and silent, his jaw tight, his hand trembling. Rejection continued until the final name on the list was called the Prince of Krelter, who looked down at her with red reptilian eyes and said with no shame she would bring shame to his bloodline. Then he turned and walked away. Alira stood alone, her crown slightly tilted, her shoulders shaking, but still she did not cry. The crowd whispered and the press drones hovered, waiting to catch a royal breakdown. But she gave them none. She turned and walked back to her chamber without a word. The door closed behind her, and the tears finally came falling on her hands as she sank to the floor. Her father entered an hour later and sat beside her, his voice low and full of weight. He told her that the council was furious, their power was slipping, and if no marriage bond was formed soon, Velaria could lose its place in the Galactic Council. She asked why her size mattered so much when her heart was loyal and her mind sharp. He had no answer, only sorrow and shame. He stood and said they would try another way. He would find someone outside the traditional circles, someone not blinded by old rules or ancient pride. He would send emissaries across less advanced systems and seek what the galaxy had never tried before. He would look toward Earth. 2 days later, a small royal vessel left the Valerian system. Its destination was the Blue Planet. Earth, a place ignored by most high civilizations, known for its primitive cultures and chaotic history, but also known for its fierce spirit and unpredictable nature. Aboard the ship were 2 royal guards, a translator drone, and the princess herself, who stared out of the window as stars moved past her eyes, empty, her thoughts heavy. She wondered if any being in the universe would ever see her as more than a mistake, more than a symbol of her planet's failure on Earth. A young man named Jay sat in a dusty garage filled with broken machines and forgotten dreams. He had once built racing drones and small repair bots, but after losing his parents in a fire and failing to finish his engineering degree, he now survived by fixing old parts for local farmers and junk dealers. He lived alone with no dreams left and no visitors expected. He sat under a flickering bulb, staring at the last message from his landlord warning him of eviction. He sighed and reached for a broken circuit when a soft hum filled the air. His tools rattled and a strange light filled the room. He stepped outside and saw a circle of light spinning in his backyard, glowing like a portal from a movie. He grabbed a wrench and stepped forward, unsure if this was a prank or hallucination. Then a figure appeared inside the light, a tall, silver-armored alien, who raised one hand and spoke through a translator, offering no harm and saying they came in peace. Jace was frozen until the image of a small girl appeared behind the figure, her face tired, her eyes sad, her hand raised in a soft wave. The translator voice said, "The Princess of Velaria requests your presence." Jace laughed, at first thinking this had to be a dream or scam. He asked if this was a test show or prank, but the alien guard remained serious. The girl stepped forward slowly, and her voice came through the translator saying, "I know this is strange, but I have no one left. I just want someone to speak with me, not judge me, just speak something inside." Jace moved. He saw something in her eyes that he knew very well: loneliness, rejection, the feeling of being unseen. He dropped the wrench and rubbed his face, asking what she wanted from him. She said nothing, just a conversation, nothing more. He nodded slowly, still unsure if he was dreaming, but said, "Fine. I will come just to talk." The alien nodded, and the light grew brighter surrounding Jace as he stepped forward into the unknown, leaving his broken life behind inside. The ship the girl waited, heart pounding, wondering if this time someone would see her not as weak or small, but as something whole and worthy. As the door opened and he stepped inside, she looked up and their eyes met. The smallest smile touched her lips. Jace sat on the edge of the silver bench, looking at the floor, trying to understand how he ended up here. The ship was quiet, but he could feel a soft hum under his feet. Everything looked clean, smooth, and glowing with blue lights. He had seen spaceships in movies and games, but nothing like this. No sharp buttons, no greasy panels, just glowing walls and a floating screen in front of him showing strange symbols. He did not understand. His heart was still racing. He kept thinking maybe he was drugged or dreaming or both. But no, this felt too real, too cold, too sharp to be a dream. Two guards stood near the door, both tall with armor like mirrors and glowing lines down their arms. They did not speak, they did not blink. They just watched him without moving. He tried to smile at one of them and waved, but got no reaction. The silence made his thoughts louder and heavier. He remembered his old garage, the unpaid bills, the broken radio, the cold bed. He had nothing there, nothing worth missing, but still, this was not how he expected to leave Earth, if this was even leaving. Suddenly the door slid open without sound and the small girl from the holoscreen walked in. She looked even smaller now, wrapped in a soft purple cloak, her hair glowing like moonlight, her steps quiet like feathers. She looked up at him and tried to smile, but her eyes showed fear, or maybe sadness, or maybe both. She stopped a few feet away from him and tilted her head like she was waiting for him to speak. He stood slowly, unsure what to say, unsure how to start this strange conversation. He said his name softly. Jace, just Jace, no titles, no job, no family name. She nodded and said her name was Alira, Princess of Valaria, last of her line, chosen to find a mate or lose her world seat in the stars. He blinked and asked, why him, why Earth, why not someone richer, smarter, stronger? She looked down at her hands and said she had seen many faces across many planets, all proud, all cold, all looking down at her. She said he was the first face that looked surprised, not disgusted, the first one that looked human. Jace laughed, not because it was funny, but because he did not know what else to do. He said he was no prince, no hero, no genius, just a broken guy with a box of tools and a mountain of regrets. She said maybe that was enough. Maybe heart was heavier than muscles and louder than bloodlines. He looked at her and saw something strange, not pity, not weakness, but strength, quiet, soft, but clear like a note played in silence. Ship shook slightly, and a soft voice came from the walls saying, course locked to neutral orbit, preparing for introduction phase. Jace asked what that meant, and she explained that in her culture the first meeting must happen in neutral space, far from politics and far from expectations. He nodded, pretending to understand. She asked if he wanted tea, and he almost laughed again, but then she waved her hand, and a small round table floated up from the floor, with two warm cups made of crystal and steam rising like clouds. They sat across from each other, sipping something sweet and strange. He asked about her world, and she told him of crystal forest skies with two moons, animals that sang during sunrise. He told her about broken buses, crowded streets, city lights, and loud music. She listened with wide eyes and asked questions about Earth, things he never thought were interesting. She smiled when he spoke of pizza, confused when he mentioned traffic, and laughed when he tried to describe cat's time passed, but neither noticed. The silence between questions grew shorter. Their eyes met more often, and their smiles lasted longer. She asked him if he missed his home, and he paused, then said he had no one waiting, no one calling, no place that felt like home anymore. She looked down and whispered that she knew that feeling too. She said sometimes even in a palace full of voices, she felt invisible, like a shadow in her own story. The ship's lights dimmed, and the table sank back into the floor. She stood and said she wanted to show him something not seen by most outside her people. He followed her down a hallway with walls that shifted colors like water at sunset. They reached a chamber with a large glass window, and beyond it was space, glowing with stars and swirling colors. He gasped, seeing a nebula like a river of fire and ice stretching across the black sky. She said this was her favorite view, the place where she came to think when her heart was heavy. She asked him if he ever felt small, and he said all the time, every day, every hour. She looked at him and said, being small does not mean being unworthy. Being soft does not mean being weak. He looked at her and said maybe the galaxy needed more people like her. She smiled and said maybe it needed more people like him too. As they stood in the silent room with the stars watching, Jace realized something strange. He did not want to leave. He did not want to go back to the garage, to the empty house, to the cold nights. He looked at her and saw not a princess, not an alien, not a mission, but a person standing like him, tired like him, hoping like him, and maybe, just maybe, that was enough. Jace followed the soft footsteps of Princess Alira as she walked ahead through the glowing corridor. The walls around them shifted, with every step showing soft waves of color like living silk. The air smelled like cold rain, and something sweet he could not name. She looked back once to see if he was still behind her, and then smiled gently and kept walking without a word. He was not sure where they were going, but he trusted her more than he could explain, and each step felt like walking away from a past he no longer needed. The corridor opened into a round chamber with tall glass windows showing a full view of the galaxy. Stars burned like candles in the darkness. Swirling clouds of color danced across the sky. It was beautiful and silent and vast in a way that made him forget to breathe. The floor was smooth and soft, like moss, but glowing and warm in the center of the room was a chair shaped like a giant flower with petals slowly moving up and down. Alira walked over and sat down, her legs swinging slightly because they could not touch the floor. She looked small in the center of that giant space, but not weak. Her eyes glowed with silver light, and her hands rested on her knees as if waiting for something, maybe waiting for him. He walked closer and sat on the floor across from her, unsure if it was allowed, but she said nothing, just watched him with calm curiosity. He asked if this was her throne, and she said it was her thinking place, not a place for orders or commands, just a space for silence and truth. He nodded slowly, unsure what to say next. He had so many questions, but none felt right. She broke the silence by asking about his world, his people, his sky. He tried to explain, but found it hard to put Earth into words. He talked about sunsets that turned the sky orange and pink, about forests filled with the smell of green and mud, about the sound of music from windows at night when the streets were empty and full. At the same time, she listened without blinking, her head tilted slightly, her hands still resting on her knees. Then she told him about Valaria, about the floating gardens that moved with the wind, and the towers made of glass that sang when touched, about the creatures that glowed like stars and the nights that never fully turned dark. Her voice was soft like wind and leaves, but every word held weight. He could feel the love she had for her world, even though it had turned its back on her. She said she missed it, but also feared it now, feared going back alone. He asked if she truly wanted to find someone, or if this was just for duty. She paused and looked away, her fingers curling slightly. She said at first it was duty, but now it was something more. Now it was about finding someone who did not see her as a task or a name or a crown, just as Alira, a girl with hopes and fears and dreams. She said she did not expect him to promise anything, just to be honest and not cruel. Jace looked at her and felt a strange warmth in his chest. He said he had never seen someone like her, someone so open and quiet and strong in ways that had no words. He said he was not special, not brave, not wise, just tired of pretending he mattered to a world that never cared. She looked at him with soft eyes and said maybe that made him perfect, because he knew how it felt to be invisible. They sat in silence for a while, not awkward, not empty, just peaceful. Then she stood and walked to a small panel on the wall and touched it. The floor shifted and rose slowly, forming a platform that lifted both of them closer to the glass ceiling above them. The stars now looked close enough to touch. The light filled the room like gold dust floating around them. Alira looked up and said she used to come here as a child. When she felt small and unwanted, the stars made her feel like she was part of something endless. Jace looked at her, not the stars, and said maybe she was meant to shine too, not alone, not hidden, not judged. She turned to him slowly, her eyes wide, as if no one had ever said that to her before. He could feel her searching his face for lies and finding none. He reached out his hand, not to take hers, but to let her choose if she wanted to hold it. She hesitated, then placed her hand in his, her fingers light and cold but steady. The platform lowered and the moment passed, but something had changed between them, something quiet and deep, something that needed no name. They walked back to the main hall where the guards stood still as statues, but now they stepped aside as if understanding. Something had shifted. Alira led him to a chamber with a soft bed and said he could rest now, that tomorrow would bring questions and trials and choices. But for tonight there was peace. Jace sat on the edge of the bed and watched her leave. Her steps slow, her shoulders less heavy. He lay back and looked at the ceiling glowing with soft stars. He closed his eyes, and for the first time in years he felt like he belonged somewhere. Maybe not forever, maybe not fully, but enough to sleep without fear. The alarm rang through the silence like a scream made of light. The walls pulsed red and the floor shook under Jace as he jumped out of bed, his heart already pounding, his hands searching for balance. The door slid open before he reached it, and the hallway outside was full of flashing lights and strange voices. Speaking in a language he could not understand, he saw the two guards from before running toward the bridge, their silver armor glowing like fire in the emergency lights. Jace followed without thinking, his bare feet hitting the warm floor with every step. His mind raced, trying to remember where everything was. He turned a corner and almost collided with Princess Alira. She looked calm, but her eyes were sharp and alert, her cloak gone, her silver hair tied back in a braid. Her hands glowed with energy as she held a small device against her arm. She looked at him and said, "The ship was under attack by unknown raiders and they had to reach the command room fast." They ran side by side down the long hallway, the walls around them shifting and locking down. The emergency doors closed behind them like giant jaws, keeping the danger away, but it kept following the sound of impact. The ship trembled again, and Jace lost his balance for a moment. Alira grabbed his hand and pulled him forward, her grip stronger than he expected. They reached a round chamber with floating screens and blinking panels in all directions. The captain of the ship, a tall creature with crystal eyes, turned to them and shouted something in Valerian. Alira responded with sharp commands, her voice cold and royal. Jace stood frozen, trying to understand what he could do. He was not a soldier, not a pilot, not a fighter. He was just a man from a broken world holding on to hope with shaking hands. But then he saw the screens showing the enemy ships moving fast like sharks in a feeding circle, and he saw the panic in the crew's faces. His eyes locked on the manual override panel on the side wall. It was old tech with symbols that looked familiar, not alien, but mechanical, something he could work with. He ran to it and opened the cover, revealing wires and switches, the kind he used to fix back on Earth. He shouted to Alira, they might be able to boost the shields manually for a few seconds, just enough to break the lock of the enemy tractor beam. She nodded without hesitation and told the crew to give him access. His fingers moved fast, memory guiding them, not logic. The panel sparked and the floor trembled again. A loud thump echoed as one of the enemy blasts hit the outer hull. The ship screamed, but held together. Jace gritted his teeth and connected two wires, causing the shield core to pulse brighter than before. The enemy tractor beam blinked and then failed. The ship was free for a moment. Just one moment, but enough. The pilot turned the ship hard and fast, making the stars blur outside the windows. The enemy ships scattered, trying to follow, but the Valerian ship was faster now and moving with purpose. Alira turned to Jace and shouted something he did not hear at first. Then he saw her smile and give a quick nod. The ship had escaped for now, but the danger was not over. The raiders were not random. They were mercenaries paid by someone powerful, someone who knew where they were going. And YJ sat on the floor, breathing hard, his hands shaking, his chest burning from the effort. Alira kneeled beside him and placed a hand on his shoulder. Her eyes soft but filled with fire. She said he had saved not just the ship, but her mission and maybe her life, and she wanted to know how he knew what to do. He explained how old ships on Earth still used similar manual systems and how his job as a mechanic had forced him to learn tricks most people ignored. She laughed a small sound like wind over glass and said maybe the galaxy needed more broken men with clever hands and stubborn hearts. He smiled weakly and said maybe it just needed someone willing to try even when afraid. The crew around them slowly relaxed. The lights turned back to normal and the hum of the ship returned to its steady, calm rhythm. But everything had changed in those few minutes. Something invisible had cracked and something new had started to grow. Later that night, Alira stood on the observation deck alone, watching the stars flow past her like rivers of light. Jace walked in quietly and stood beside her. Neither spoke for a while. Then she asked if he knew what this meant, what it meant to help her, to stand beside her, to fight beside her. He said he was starting to understand that this was not just about marriage or politics or duty. It was about survival, about trust, about finding someone who would not run when the sky turned dark. She looked at him and said that in her world tests were everything, and many princes had trained their whole lives for honor and strength, but when fire came, They did not stand only Jace had stood not for power or reward, but because it was right. He looked at her and said maybe he did not need a crown, maybe he just needed a reason to believe in himself again. She reached out her hand and he took it not as a promise, but as a beginning. The news spread faster than light from one corner of the galaxy to the next. The royal broadcast showed the moment when Princess Alira reached for the human's hand, and the way he looked at her, like she was not royalty but something far more rare, something real. Within hours, thousands of alien channels picked up the signal, each one spinning a different story, each one louder than the last. Some called it madness, some called it betrayal, some even called it beautiful, but no one stayed silent. On the ice planet of Dronix, a council of warlords gathered, their faces hidden behind masks of stone, their voices low and dangerous. They said a Valerian princess bonding with a human was an insult to bloodlines older than stars. They said it would break the balance between the noble houses and make others question what was sacred. One of them slammed his clawed hand on the table and said if the king of Valaria would not stop her, then someone else must. And the floating libraries of Lumerian scholars whispered in the glowing halls, their robes trailing light, their scrolls filled with history. They searched for old laws and forgotten rules that might block such a union, but found none. Still their faces were grim. They said traditions were not just rules, they were the bones of civilization, and bones must not bend. On Valaria itself, the royal court stood frozen as the broadcast played again and again the image of the princess smiling beside a human. The king watched in silence, his face still, but his hands clenched behind his back. One advisor begged him to recall the princess at once. Another shouted that the human should be arrested, tried, and sent back to Earth in disgrace. The king raised his hand and all fell silent. He said they would wait and watch, not out of weakness, but because he had seen something in his daughter's eyes that he had never seen before. Strength without anger, pride without arrogance, and love without fear. Meanwhile, on the ship, Princess Alira stood before a round table where her personal guards waited, their faces serious, their armor freshly polished. They told her the truth. Without kindness, a bounty had been placed on the human's head, not just by one group, but by many warlords, noble families, and even unknown shadow factions. They said letting Jace stay on the ship was dangerous. They said the galaxy was now watching, and many wanted him. Goni Alira listened without blinking, her eyes calm, her heart burning. She said Jace would not leave. He had proven his worth when others had run. He had faced danger without armor or training. He had saved lives not for reward, but because it was right. She said if the galaxy hated that, then let it hate. She would not break her word. She would not step back. Jace heard all of it from the corner where he stood, unsure if he should feel honored or terrified. He had never been hated by thousands of planets before. He asked her why she would risk everything for someone like him, someone who owned nothing, who came from nowhere. She walked to him and said maybe that was what made him worthy, because he stood when it mattered, because he saw her not as a crown but as a person. That night the ship entered stealth mode, shields up, lights dimmed, engines silent like a ghost drifting through shadows. They changed course, avoiding known paths and slipping through space unnoticed, but danger still followed in whispers and codes and signals that danced through the stars like poison. One night, while Jace worked in the engine bay fixing a loose coil, he heard footsteps fast and heavy. He turned and saw one of the guards running, eyes wide, breath short. He said there was movement in the lower deck. Unknown signals, possible intruder. Jace dropped his tools and ran, following the sound of the alarm. He reached the lower hall just in time to see a tall figure dressed in black, holding a glowing blade near Alira's chamber door. Without thinking, Jace grabbed a metal rod and charged forward, his heart pounding, his breath sharp. The figure turned and swung, but Jace ducked barely. The rod hit the attacker's arm, causing a flash of sparks. The figure hissed in anger and lunged again. This time, Jace blocked with both hands and kicked hard. The attacker stumbled, and Alira stepped out, her hands raised, her eyes glowing with fierce light. She whispered a word, and a blast of energy knocked the intruder against the wall. Guards arrived and dragged the figure away, blood and sparks trailing behind them. Alira looked at Jace's shirt torn, his hands bruised, his chest rising like a storm. She touched his face gently and said the galaxy would not stop them with fear. They would answer fear with courage, hate with honor, darkness with light. From that night, Jace was no longer just a guest. He was part of something larger, part of her mission, part of her hope, and maybe part of her heart. Jace stood in the center of the glowing arena, his boots sinking slightly into the soft blue surface around him. Alien symbols floated in the air like silent judges watching his every move. Lights circled above his head, and a low hum filled the space like a heartbeat. He looked across the arena and saw Princess Alira sitting on a high platform, her hands resting on her lap, her face calm, but her eyes filled with storm. Behind her stood the royal elders, cloaked in silver and silence. The voice of the trial keeper echoed through the space, loud and sharp, calling out the purpose of the gathering, the trial of worth, a tradition older than the stars, a test only the chosen could face, no matter their blood, no matter their name. 3 trials stood before the human mind, heart, and will. If he passed, he would earn respect not just from the council but from the galaxy. If he failed, he would be sent away and his name forgotten. Jace took a deep breath, his fingers trembling slightly. He had faced machines and monsters before, but never like this, never under so many eyes, never with so much on the line. The first trial was of the mind. A chamber opened behind him, and he stepped inside. Walls closed around him, and the lights vanished, leaving him in darkness. A soft voice whispered puzzles, and an alien tongue. Symbols danced in front of him, fading too fast to read, then reappearing with new shapes and colors. He stared, tried to understand, let his instinct guide him. He saw patterns in the chaos, music in the silence. He connected images, numbers, memories of machines, back home, wires and circuits and sparks. His hands moved, tracing paths through light, choosing not what looked right, but what felt right. The chamber pulsed once, then opened. The elders nodded once, and the voice called success, but not praise, not yet. He stepped back into the arena, sweat on his brow, his heart pounding. The second trial was of the heart. This one, no chamber, no walls, only a vision. A hologram rose before him, showing Earth not as it was, but as it could be, broken, burning, empty faces crying out for help. He saw his old home reduced to ash, the voices of children lost in the smoke, and then the image shifted to Valaria under siege, its towers falling, its sky black, and Alira screaming his name. The voice asked him one question: save one world and let the other fall. His breath caught his eyes wide. He looked at both images, then closed his eyes and stepped forward, placing his hand on the center of the 2 scenes. He said he would not choose between lives. He would not trade one for the other. He said he would fight for both or fall trying. The images faded and the voice was silent for a long time, then spoke once more. Trial passed. Now came the third and final trial, the trial of will. A door opened, and a beast stepped out, its body covered in scales, its eyes like fire, its breath like smoke. It roared, shaking the arena, and charged without pause. Jace grabbed the rod. They had given him nothing more than a staff of light, and stood his ground. He did not run, did not hide. He waited until the last second, then rolled to the side and swung the staff at the beast's legit, stumbled, turned, and attacked again, faster now, claws flashing, teeth snapping. He ducked, dodged, moved like a shadow, using speed, not strength. He saw a weak spot near the neck, glowing faintly. He aimed, struck with all his weight. The beast screamed and collapsed, smoke rising from its body. The voice called the trial complete. The arena lights dimmed, and the crowd watching from the skyships above began to cheer. Jace stood panting, knees shaking, arms bruised, but eyes bright. The platform lowered, and Alira walked toward him. Her steps slow but sure. She reached him and placed her hand over his chest, feeling his heartbeat. She said he had done what none expected, not just survived, but chosen right when it mattered most. The elders gathered around, and one by one placed a silver mark on his arm, symbols of courage, of truth, of unity. The king stepped forward, his armor shining and his eyes full of emotion. He looked at Jace, not with doubt, but with something close to pride. He said the human had done what royal blood alone could not. He had earned a place not by force, but by choice. The arena echoed with sound as the council declared Jace worthy not just of the princes, but of the bond between their worlds. That night a celebration lit the sky. Ships flew in patterns, lights danced across the stars, and music filled every hall. Jace sat beside Alira, watching it all, unsure if he was dreaming, but knowing deep down that this moment was real. She leaned toward him, whispered that this was not the end, just the beginning, and he nodded, knowing the hardest journey was still ahead. The council chamber stood silent as the final vote echoed across the tall stone walls. Symbols of light floated above each seat, casting a soft glow onto the silver floor. Jace stood beside Princess Alira, his heart racing, his body still aching. From the trial, his eyes fixed on the glowing crown that hovered in the center of the room. Each elder had cast their choice one by one in full view of the galaxy, and now the crown waited for a voice to claim it. The Valerian king stepped forward, his robe trailing behind him, his face unreadable, but his voice clear. He looked at Jace for a long time, then turned to the council and said he would no longer stand in the way of his daughter's path. He said her heart had chosen, and her choice had been tested not by blood, not by fear, but by fire. He declared her worthy of her throne, and declared Jace not as an outsider, but as one of them. Gasps filled the chamber, and lights danced along the walls as the crown slowly lowered toward Alira. She raised her hands, but before touching it she looked at Jace, her eyes searching his face, her voice soft as she asked if he would stand beside her, not just for today but for the days ahead. When peace would be hard and storms would rise. He nodded. Without words, his eyes steady, his hands open and ready together. They lifted the crown, placing it not on one head but between their hands as it lit up with ancient fire signals. Raced across the galaxy to every corner of known space, showing the moment a human and an alien royal claimed a shared future together, rulers of two worlds, united not by force but by belief outside. The palace skyships flew in formation, releasing streams of colored light across the night sky. Crowds gathered in every city square, cheering, singing, dancing. Music echoed through the crystal towers, and firelight glowed in the floating gardens. Children watched in wonder, elders wept in silence, and somewhere deep in space enemies watched in anger, their shadows waiting for weakness, their plans already moving inside the palace. Alira and Jace walked through the great halls, now filled with flowers of every kind. Beings from hundreds of planets stood waiting to greet them, each one offering a gift or a word or a promise, some still unsure, some still proud, but all present for something new, something never seen. Before Alira wore a gown woven from star silk, her hair wrapped in silver threads, her eyes shining with quiet strength. Jace wore simple robes, gifted by the council, his hands still rough from battle, but his posture tall and sure. Together they walked side by side, not as queen and servant, not as ruler and stranger, but as equals, chosen not by fate, but by choice. In the garden they found a moment of quiet beneath a tree that sang softly with the wind. Jace looked at the stars above, remembering Earth, remembering the garage, the loneliness, the long nights filled with silence and tools, now replaced by lights and voices and meaning. He turned to Alira and asked if she ever thought this day would come. She smiled and said not in her dreams, not even in her hopes, but now that it had come, she would protect it with all she had. They sat together watching the moons rise one by one, casting shadows over the trees. The wind carried the sound of celebration, but in their quiet space there was only breath, only warmth, only the knowledge that they were not alone, no longer lost, no longer broken, but found in the place they least expected. Just asked her what came next, what it meant to be part of this world, to be more than a visitor, more than a helper. She said it meant learning, listening, leading, not with fear but with care. She said it meant being the voice for those unheard, the shield for those unseen, and the light for those still searching. He nodded, feeling the weight, but also the Honora message arrived through a soft chime glowing in the air. Before them it was from Earth, a signal from the small alliance of humans who had watched the events unfold, who had questions, who had fears, who had hope. Jace reached out and touched the light, accepting the connection, his voice ready to speak, not as one forgotten, but as one now seen. Alira placed her hand over his heart and said the galaxy would never be the same, because one man chose to offer kindness, because one girl refused to be silent, because together they proved that hearts speak louder than blood, that courage is not born from crowns but from choice, and that love, even across stars, can build a bridge no war can break. As the stars turned above and the night deepened around them, they stood once more, hands joined, eyes forward, ready to face what came, not with fear but with faith that what they had started would grow, that others would follow, that peace was not a dream but a path, and they were the first to walk it.